This presentation will be about the significance of Errol Morris and the influence he has had on documentaries through his films. I was introduced to Errol Morris through the film The Fog of War. It follows Robert McNamara and his career. He was a Secretary of Defense for two different presidents. And what I found really interesting about the documentary was not just Robert McNamara and the story he had to tell, but the creative decisions made by the director, which was Errol Morris. And Errol Morris has had a huge impact on documentaries through different decisions he's made and creations he's had. And The Thin Blue Line and Gates of Heaven are just two of the movies he's made that have had a great reception and critical acclaim during his long career. In this picture, we see the Interrotron, and you see Morris. Morris is credited with inventing the Interrotron, and this was a very huge creation in the documentary genre because it helped solve a problem that people have been facing for a very long time, which was during interviews, the subject that they were interviewing would lots of the time have a difficult time focusing at a certain point because they aren't trained professionals, so their eyes would dart from different places, and this would make it very difficult for editors because it would give them less space to edit and cut scenes, and then it would also just give the interview a very unnatural look that a lot of filmmakers did not like. So Morris, in order to solve this issue, created the Interrotron, and this was huge because, as you can see in the picture, it allows for the subject to focus on one point, so it gives them a lot more natural of a look, and their eyes don't dart as much, and therefore editors start having a lot easier of a time in order to edit and cut scenes, and it gave them more freedom, and it also gave interviews a much more natural look. And the first time this device was used was actually in the film The Fog of War. The picture on this slide is from a movie called The Thin Blue Line. It is one of Morris's most critically acclaimed and influential films. During this film, he uses a technique he's become very popular for using. It is the reenactment. He uses this in stories where the truth isn't always very available. It's not very clear. And he does this in order to offer different possibilities of what could have actually occurred during the story. Morris himself says the reenactments in The Thin Blue Line are not illustrations of truth, quite the opposite. They are designed to take you into the untruth. They're illustrations of what people claimed had happened, but which didn't happen. They're ironic. And the reason why his use of reenactments is so prominent is because this begins to challenge how documentaries tell stories at face value, because many people expect from documentaries to tell the story using real life footage and interviews, a fly on the wall technique that has become very popular. But Morris is different because by using reenactments, not only does he change the way that the story is being told, but he is inviting the audience to participate more in the storytelling because he is asking them also to be active participants in trying to find out what the truth is from the story and information that Morris is giving to them. It is important to remember that Morris has had a very long career, and where documentaries are now is not where they were when he first started his career. So many of the techniques that he is using and incorporates in his films may be common to people nowadays who watch documentaries for the first time. But when he was first starting out, a lot of the things he was doing was very different for a documentary maker to do in their films, and a lot of the style choices he was choosing was not very common. He's very famous for bringing a more fiction cinematic touch to nonfiction documentaries. He is famous for choosing famous composers such as Philip Glass and the late Caleb Sampson, and he's also famous for creating distinctive looks in his documentaries through cinematography. And these are the type of choices that in documentaries before were not as important. But I believe if you watch documentaries in today's time, you can see it across all of them. And Morris was one of the important figures in pushing this into documentaries. In this slide, I included the book, The Cinema of Errol Morris by David Ruscha. It was a book I came across during my research of Errol Morris and had a quote I really liked, which says, Morris's films allow us to rethink the traditional distinction between stylistically conservative documentaries. And the reason why I like that quote is because Morris himself has said that his influences from when he was young don't come from nonfiction films or documentaries, but they actually come from fiction films such as The Passion of Joan of Arc, The Big Sleep, Rebel Without a Cause. And I think you can really see this in his documentaries, and it's because that they've become so influential and different to other traditional documentaries. And I think that's one of the biggest influences that Errol Morris has had, is really challenging the genre of documentaries in and of themselves. He has made style choices that you really wouldn't see. In documentaries, it's traditionally an observational mode, and it doesn't encourage participation from the audience. But something that Morris has done through his films is the opposite. We've talked about how he uses reenactments, cinematography, and composers. He does this all to create a documentary that encourages more participation from the audience. He enjoys when there is space when the truth is not clear. He enjoys asking the audience to think critically, and if through his voice, he's not trying to scream his story, he's trying to show his story and let the audience think about the story for themselves and create their own conclusions. And that is a clash that he has from traditional documentaries, cinema verite. And I think that is one of Errol Morris's greatest influences. Errol Morris has had a long career of creating documentaries and become one of the most influential and critically acclaimed documentary makers of his generation through his films The Thin Blue Line, The Fog of War, and Mr. Death. Here in this picture, it shows Morris winning his Academy Award for the documentary The Fog of War. But perhaps his greatest achievement are the creation of new devices for documentary making, such as the Interrotron, utilizing techniques that you do not see in traditional documentaries, such as using composers and cinematographers to create different stylistic looks on documentaries, and incorporating reenactments in documentaries, and helping to redefine what a documentary truly is and can be for the audience.